Koenraad, very nice to meet you again.
Hey, Fabian, nice to join. Thanks for
I
the
really
invitation.
appreciate you making time for this, especially just before Christmas. You're based in Belgium and your career has been about smart mobility. Would you mind just giving us a little bit of context to where you come from and a little bit more sort of nuance to your professional journey?
Yeah, I'm probably the mobility expert with the least likely degree because I have a degree in archaeology, which doesn't fit mobility at all. I was specialized in African prehistory, and you don't find that in Belgium. So I went out looking for another field to join, and I joined the public transport company. That was my first step in mobility. I worked as a public transport specialist for 7 years. After that, I joined the consultancy company. That consultancy company was then bought over in a series of takeovers. So I found myself from a company of 20 guys all of a sudden into a company of 200,000 people. Atmosphere didn't suit me well. You'll find that I'm quite an entrepreneurial spirit. So being stuck in a large organization didn't suit me, but we were a distributor for PTV software. So I then joined PTV Software, the distributor for modeling and transportation software. First as a salesperson, but then I moved up in the organization and I became responsible for the solution portfolio globally for traffic software. And one of the divisions was new mobility. So we tried new softwares out for mobility as a service, for autonomous vehicles, everything that's brand new in mobility. That was at the time when mobility was for investors really a hotbed. When MaaS Global started, when Via Van started, there's plenty of other investments in mobility. I did that for a few years, but that was a job in Germany. My family's still in Belgium, so having to go from away from home from Monday to Thursday was kind of heavy. So I came back, did a little detour outside of mobility, but I got back to the first law of mobility and I joined up with a few ex-colleagues and ex-people who I used to work with to form a new consultancy called Movias. Movias, we call ourselves kind of like the 40-year-old startup because we've existed only for 3 years, but everybody here has at least 20 years of experience in smart mobility. Mostly data driven, everything around AI, generative AI, machine learning, but also data standardization, floating car data. That's the type of projects as consultants that we do. We're kind of atypical in the sense that we take on a big part ownership of the projects that we do. So we typically take it a bit further than what the client wants us to do because we want to make the world a better place. And starting with smart mobility, we think is a good place to start. So that's in a nutshell the whole career going from archaeology to general AI, generative AI, machine learning, data handling, etc., in the middle. If I have to sum everything up in my entire career, I think I'm at my best in the field between business and technology. So I'm
Mm.
not the developer that will build you the latest tool, but I'm also not the guy who's completely agnostic about technology. I like looking at the use case, translating those requirements to what a technology specialist can develop, or looking at the technology and then seeing how can I apply this to this field of smart mobility and what are the opportunities. And that's a very handy niche to be in because you know a little bit about everything, but there's nothing you know everything about, and that's a very comfortable place for me.
No, thank you so much for the introduction. It sounds absolutely fascinating. Let's start with the topic of smart mobility. One probably in some way, shape, or form has heard about it, but not too many people really know what it actually means and entails, and even fewer people know sort of the history of it. Let's maybe start with the first bucket and then transitioning into the second one. So what actually is smart mobility? And then if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little bit of flavor to the sort of past 5 to 10 years of smart mobility developments, that would be much appreciated.
Yep. Smart mobility. Well, mobility is an aspect that touches everybody's lives because we all have to go from one place to another. Unless they invent teleportation, your day starts and your day ends with mobility. And people have been trying to optimize that since the 70s. And smart mobility has always about how can we adapt what we do with mobility. And that goes from the network design of mobility, which is slow adaptation, building a highway, that's a slow way of changing somebody's mobility. Public transport can go a bit faster. Start a bus or have a bus. Tomorrow we can double the frequency of a bus line, no problem, but it's still not real time. If you go towards smart mobility, it's being able to adjust the way we run our mobility systems to the demands of logistics and people and goods, because everybody always talks about personal mobility, but the mobility of goods is just as important, especially when you look at CO emissions. etc., is being able to dynamically adapt the systems that you have to the demand that you have so that you get the most out of what you have. That's smart mobility. You can do that in several layers. You can either influence the travel demand by working from home, by doing location-based analysis, but that's something that's very difficult as a governmental organization to control. You can also optimize the way you use your infrastructure. And you have examples like dynamic lanes, where you have in the morning 3 lanes going city inwards, and in the evening 3 lanes going out, and then 1 lane switches directions, for instance. Things like real-time traffic management, that's been the last 20, 25 years, it's been a real hot topic, is how can we detect where the traffic jams are and dynamically optimize traffic lights. What we've seen in the last 5 years is that because mobility has become so much more dynamic with the advent of working from home, with the fact that the companies are having satellite offices a lot more, and with the fact that we have a lot more data, especially real-time data, through smartphones, through sensors, there's an enormous amount of data, is that we've seen growth on 2 sides. One is the dynamic changing of the infrastructure has become almost real-time. It's almost vehicle to vehicle that we're optimizing traffic lights. The other one is we're seeing innovative business models. And then I'm talking about mobility as a service, shared vehicles, micro mobility, where people say, okay, I want to go from A to B. I don't make my choice, the same choice, one mode of transportation every day the same. No, I look at that particular day. Today I need to go from A to B, and I can do it by taking a mobility scooter to the station, taking a train to another station, then getting a taxi for the rest of my journey, or get a shared vehicle. I have a blue bike, or I have any other of the shared systems. Shared mobility has been a real game changer. And what people focus on smart mobility a lot is trying to integrate all the different microsystems of, okay, I have a blue bike app, I have a Poppy app for my shared cars, I have an Uber app. How do I get to integrate that? That's what mobility as a service is all about. And on the other hand, we also see the policymakers trying to be ready for the fast changing technology. That's something you don't feel yet, but we know that autonomous vehicles are coming. We know that optimized vehicles are coming. Electric mobility, what does that mean, for instance, for logistics? If a truck is electric instead of a diesel truck, what does it mean? Where do you need stationing? How do you change drivers? Where do you do your recharging? And can we use those changes for the good? Because if an electric vehicle is stuck in a traffic jam, it's still a traffic jam. It'll be an electric traffic jam. It'll be a quiet traffic jam, but it's still a traffic jam. So electrification is good, is bad, could be both. The same with, for instance, shared vehicles. If I share a vehicle with you and that vehicle has to be repositioned between trips, the net result is more mileage in an already congested network. How do we deal with that? That's all those aspects. Looking at data, because the paradigm has shifted from data poor times in the 1970s. That's when traditional transport modeling and traditional policy making started out, is we have only a few data points. Let's try and model all the rest, and let's try and see if we can build a deterministic model. Let's see if we can test policies and see which one fit best. And that's a slow process. Right now, we live in data-rich times. There's so much data that you need systems to handle that data. Then you can make your policy making almost in real time. What I decide is the best policy today is not necessarily the best policy tomorrow. And that decision will be data-driven. And that's smart mobility. If you apply that paradigm of we have plenty of data and we have different layers on which we take our decisions, and you apply that data through all layers, going from trip generation, trip distribution, down to the minute-to-minute handling of traffic, that's smart mobility.
No, thank you so much for the overview. That's super clear and interesting, which leads me to my follow-up question around technology. So lots of these innovations seem to be at least strongly enabled by technological advancements over the past couple of years. From your perspective, what are some of the technological developments that really change the game as it relates to smart mobility in terms of unlocking some of these use cases and the progress in this area?
Yeah, one that has changed enormously how we see mobility is sensor data becoming readily available and sensors becoming a lot cheaper. If we look at all the systems of shared mobility, they would not be possible without real-time access to cheap sensors. If you need to know where a vehicle is, you need to have a sensor. If you need to know where a bike is, if you want to keep shared bicycles affordable, you have to have a cheap way of tracking that vehicle, of updating the data, of handling that data. So cheaper sensors and basically the whole IoT movement, but then applied to mobility, that is what has made shared systems possible. That's a big change. The second big is also through sensors is that real-time traffic management, so real-time handling of data for optimization of traffic lights, but also more and more real-time censoring of air quality, for instance, and then taking measures to optimize that. That has also influenced traffic management greatly. Whereas in the past, you were doing an expensive measuring campaign, and then you would take decisions over the course of a few months to implement next year. You're measuring cheaply and in large quantities, you're measuring traffic and the result of traffic, so air quality, etc. You're measuring that in real time and then applying straight away those things. So IoT has been a game changer there, is getting those sensors out and getting all the data there. The other one is social networks. And social networks have made it easy for people to connect. And people that connect start sharing things. And that's where mobility as a service, people often say mobility as a service is dead, but it's not entirely dead. Because mobility as a service from the point of companies like MaaS Global, I want to be the one integrator for all your transportation needs. Difficult. Difficult because they forgot the business model. How are you going to make money on public transport tickets where margins are already very thin? But mobility as a service, as in I want to use a bicycle that's not my bicycle, that's a group bicycle, and I want to use it now, and I want to know where it is, and I want to share my location with other people, that's alive and kicking. There's mobility scooters everywhere, there's shared bikes everywhere, there's car sharing everywhere, and the fact that we're used to actually using apps for everything has made a drastic change in the behavior of people. And that's something we shouldn't underestimate.
Just on that point of, I guess, the sort of little bit cyclical nature of the development in terms of market penetration, I would be really curious to get your perspective on, I guess, the current trends and future developments. Just from sort of personal anecdote, I still remember when I did some consulting projects in Berlin 6-7 years ago. It was really hyped up. There were these tier scooters and loads of different brands all over the place. Some of them landed in the river and then they disappeared again due to regulation. And similar here in York, where I live now, where a couple of years ago now we had all of these electric scooters. I know it's just sort of a very small niche, but they also disappeared. I was just wondering, but I still think in around London it's still fairly popular, especially with bike sharing and some other modes of transport. I was just wondering, what are some of the current, from a sort of market development standpoint, main developments, and then where do you think this will sort of go to over the coming 3 to 5 years in terms of the types of solutions and who the players might or might not be?
Well, the cyclic nature is such that you always have a hype and then you have a lot of players jumping on the bandwagon, but with badly executed plans, which means that they have scooters everywhere where they're not needed. They're not looking at the demand. The scooters themselves can be poor quality sometimes. So you will always see a first shift of those who do it right will survive. Doing it right means choosing the right location to do it. In a middle-sized Belgian city, there's really not much of a business model, but in London, there's a perfect business model. So choose your location. The second part is what you see more and more now is a demand for integration between the different players. And that has to do with the advent of data spaces. Data spaces is a concept where we do federated data sharing. So I keep my data, but I expose it to anybody who wants to use my data. The same could be applied to transactions. And if I'm the owner of a fleet of these microservices or micro mobility bicycles or whatever you want to do, or micro scooters, and I expose my API and I have a federated way of actually giving people through another app access to my services, because there's a standardized way of transmitting these transactions, then the net result will be that I will gain customers for which I have to do no investment. But also if I can do it the other way around, if you can use my app in a city where I'm not operationally active, but through my app you can get somebody else's vehicles, then that whole idea of MaaS being the integrated way will become a reality, but bottom up and not top
Mm.
down. It won't be one app saying, okay, we have nothing operationally and we'll start integrating everybody who wants to be integrated, but it will be, okay, hang on, there's a cost for getting started over there. I'm going to do this by having somebody expose their API to me and by having a standard way of transaction with identity management, with standardized automatic contract handling. That's a niche that we've seen develop in the past 2 years, which will make applying sound business models to micromobility much, much, much easier. Because if you look at MaaS, why have certain companies survived and certain companies have failed? It's not about the technology. It's about business model. MaaS Global failed because it forgot the business model. It was perfect in integrating everything, but if your business model is we hope people pay a 500 euro subscription per month to then pay out to public transport companies, and we hope that the cost isn't higher than that 500 euros per month, and that's a bad business model. And I think Sampo is the first one to admit it if you talk to MaaS Global. If you look at something like Olympus Mobility in Belgium, they started similarly as MaaS Global, but they positioned themselves B2B, saying for all the employees in your company, forget all those ticketing systems and expenses that you have to hand in, just give them the Olympus app and we'll send you one invoice end of the month. We're saving you money. They're thriving, they're flourishing. They're doing exactly the same as MaaS Global, and it's because that technology of easy integration and easy transaction sharing made their business model possible. And it's those who focus on the business model being made possible by the technology that will survive. Those who look at the technology and say, now we can do something nobody else is doing, but they forget to think, should we do it? Then these are having a hard time.
On that aspect of there are some sort of critical success factors, I was just, while you were speaking, wondering if there are also significant cultural factors and aspects that we need to be aware of. Just on a global scale, is MaaS currently more popular in certain regions, irrespective of whether it's more rural or, I guess, in and around cities, it's just naturally more popular given the characteristics? But on a global scale, are there certain cultural contexts where currently MaaS is more popular?
I don't think so. We've seen apps like Uber being more taken up in certain areas, but they're not typical for mobility as a service. I think the best way is you have to look at the competition, and the competition is owning a private car. If you go to Paris, for instance, owning a private car is not only very expensive from a parking point of view, but also very inconvenient because there is no parking. Every road is actually congested, and I don't want to take my car every day. I want to decide at the moment, do I take the subway, do I take the car, do I take a bike? And then if you have that type of environment, then being able to compete as a mobility as a service provider is easy because you provide the flexibility that somebody needs in that environment. But if you go to rural Canada and the distances are 100 kilometers between two neighbors, yeah, there's not going to be much potential for mobility as a service. If I look at my own country, for instance, there's several cities with a completely different mobility policy. The city of Antwerp, for instance, has had, I need to be clear because they've changed right now because they see it's not a viable option. They have had a very car positive policy where you could basically drive your car into the city center. You have plenty of parking, cheap parking. In the city of Ghent, for instance, was the center needs to be car free. If you enter with your car, you need to have permissions. It's going to cost you. Park and rides, that's as far as you're going to get. And then you need to organize yourself if you want to go city center. Mobility as a service thrived in Ghent. It didn't thrive in Antwerp. Now, Antwerp realized that, hang on, we're actually congesting our city even more. We're making it unlivable for inhabitants. So they're changing their ways. And you see the net result is that mobility as a service all of a sudden becomes viable there. So it's as much a matter of policy as it is culture. Now, of course, policy is an expression of culture, but this is an example where in one country, two cities take completely opposite choices. That's going to be more the case than saying it's culture. I don't think it's culture.
On this aspect of regulation more globally, I mean, arguably in many areas of the world, the single main driver for electric vehicles has been regulation. I mean, there have been many studies about it, and it's also, I guess, common sense, but why it's been popular in certain periods in China, why it's been fairly popular in Norway, and there have been lots of studies on it that there is this direct correlation. I was just wondering, linking this to mobility as a service and diving a little bit deeper into that, what specific types of legislations have we seen as it relates to mobility as a service? And from your personal perspective, which ones of them have been more successful in actually incentivizing what we aim to achieve, which is, I guess, sustainability in terms of environmental sustainability, but then also economic aspects and convenience, etc., for users?
What I've seen several policies, but you could basically sum them up under one theme, and that's intelligent access. And there's programs in Holland, there's programs in Belgium, and I'm pretty sure in other countries as well, where providing access to a certain region is regulated. And it could be, in a lot of places, it starts out from an emission start point. You see, we have a low emission zone, and you can only enter low emission zone if your vehicle meets certain criteria. But it's been expanded to say, no, this is an urban area where you can only enter if A, you live there, or B, you have a valid reason, and then there's a list of reasons to go there. Couple that with parking. If you make it difficult for people to park, because if you let people choose, they drive their car up to the store where they want to be or to the location where they want to be and park their car 1 meter from the front door and then complain about parked cars. That's how people think. If you restrict parking, make it expensive or difficult to park, and if you have an intelligent way, and that could be dynamic, of regulating who has access at what times and under what conditions, that's when mobility as a service, that's where the balance is. And what you see is that dynamic part on smart mobility, what I discussed earlier, could also be applied to access, where you say, for instance, the whole advent with just-in-time ordering with the Amazons, etc. If you say, hang on, as an Amazon driver, you only have access between 9 and 11 in the morning, and only if you have a vehicle of that type with that type of emissions, then you can apply exactly the same to your private transportation and say, okay, it's okay that you live in the city center of Ghent, but you only have access 5 times a year for these and these. If you want to move, okay, good. If you want to go to the store, well, once a week you can do that. And if you have visitors, well, you can apply on a website and say, I have visitors this week, but you don't have visitors every day. And if you regulate that clearly and you make it not impossible to live in a city, because these people also see the benefits. When they see a street where you don't have any on-street parking, which is, if you think of any major city and you think away all the on-street parking, you have a fantastic city. So people see that. And people want that, but they also want the flexibility for when they really need to drive into their street to be able to do that. If you get that balance right, and you do that dynamically by using data, by using well-described policies, and by sharing that policies in a standardized way among all of the different channels that you can find, then you will have a good feeding ground for mobility as a service. Mobility as a service should be a means to an end, and that end is a livable city. It shouldn't be, my goal is to have a successful mobility as a service system. Yeah, as a company, as a mobility as a service provider, I want to make money. But as a city, as a policymaker, mobility as a service is one of the tools or even one of the indicators. If you set your policies right, you will see private entrepreneurs taking that opportunity to install themselves in your city for their good. But as a policymaker, you have to set the boundaries.
Speaking of the players involved, let's pivot a little bit to automotive manufacturers. Yes. When I first started working in consulting 7-8 years ago, this was the time of Car2Go and Share Now. I'm not sure if they still exist in one form or another, but this was when they were reasonably popular. And similar to what you alluded to with the sort of hype cycle, back then mobility as a service was one of the, with the sort of case acronym as shared, one being sort of one of 4 really critical pillars in the strategy of most major manufacturers. Over the past, sort of, especially with the pandemic, 3 to 5 years, it's become a little bit more quiet, while still being a topic of importance, but not as high on the strategic agenda from my sort of personal experience. Whereas more recently, now that we're transitioning into a post-COVID world and with lots of the other problems solved and a sort of clear path forward for electric vehicles and connectivity, mobility services within OEMs seem to become more popular as a topic again. And then I believe it was Tesla who recently announced that they're offering sort of a peer-to-peer Tesla sharing service, which was received fairly positively. I was just wondering, from your perspective, first of all, is there any additional sort of insight that you could share on the role of automotive manufacturers in this landscape of mobility services? And then where do you see this developing in the future, and what would be potentially recommendations to leaders within automotive manufacturers to, I guess, help you as mobility service experts and providers downstream to offer the right solutions to end customers?
As you say, the hype cycle, I remember a meeting with a certain German car manufacturer, which was located in Bavaria, where one of the executives opened the meeting by saying, our goal is to sell less cars. And that was followed by a statement that we want to move from selling an asset to providing mobility as a subscription. They have been struggling with that because I haven't seen one very successful manufacturer being able to do that. They've done it in many different ways. I think BMW had their dynamic leasing, and the problem is there everybody wants a small car during the year and a big car during the vacations, and then you have an imbalance in asset management. I've seen Mercedes take a very big investment in Via Vans, trying to look into mobility sharing. One thing where I think everybody falls short, and that's why I'm a bit skeptic about the example about Uber that you said, is that for a lot of people, a car is a big investment, but it's also a personal investment. And sharing that with other people feels very uneasy. And the best comparison I've seen was Carlo van der Weijer from the Technical University of Eindhoven said, because a lot of people say my car is unused 90% of the time. I want to make better use of that by sharing it. That's the typical sentence behind that. And he said, well, there's one thing in my house that's used even less than 90, that's empty even less than 90% of the time, and that's my toilet. Yet I don't rent out my toilet. He has a point. People don't like renting out a car, which car manufacturers have spent ages trying to convince you that your car is part of your personality, that there's people who have a hobby of configuring cars on car configurator websites and trying to come up with the most personalized vehicle, personalized license plate, or wrapped in different colors. Once I've done that, I want somebody else to drive it. That seems like something that won't happen. So if they want to make a shift, and they need to make the shift from selling an asset with the services that belong to it, because an electric vehicle, for instance, is already a lot less costly in maintenance, but less costly in maintenance for the owner means less turnover for the car brand in maintenance and less margin to be made on maintenance. So they need to move to think about what vehicle for what purpose. If I sell you a vehicle for personal use and I'm going to go Freude am Fahren and Durchsprung für Technik and everything is personal and freedom and all these advertisements about Norwegian fjords. I worked in Germany, so picked a bit up. If I see these advertisements, it's a lifestyle choice I'm making. That's not the vehicle I want for mobility as a service. The vehicle I want for mobility as a service is a vehicle which lends itself to mobility as a service, which means that it's easy to operate by everybody, it's robust, it doesn't wear out quickly, it's neutral in its colors, and it's practical. I don't mind sitting in a 6-people van when it's a shared vehicle, but I wouldn't want to own one. So don't make the same choices you do in designing a car for personal use that you do designing a car for mobility as a service. There's been a few attempts of people of creating these people movers that were specifically made to do car sharing. The problem there is then they went overboard and made it fully autonomous and all kinds of promises. Technologically, autonomy is harder than we thought. So it's not there yet. But they need to think about the positioning that they have. Are we positioning ourselves as a mobility provider, or are we positioning ourselves as a lifestyle brand? Jaguar, for instance, reinventing itself heavily as a lifestyle brand. Okay, their choice. There's a lot of comment about whether they're right or wrong. I'm not a marketeer. I'm not going to say the numbers are going to prove them right or wrong in a couple of years, but they made a clear choice. Now, if you look at brands like Mercedes or brands like BMW, Volkswagen, for instance, you could also argue that by differentiating your vehicles into, okay, these are utilitarian vehicles, and you can actually modularly change them and renting them out to cars, things like Poppy or any other brand that could be do the sharing. They're completely different vehicles. Don't forget that they're completely different vehicles. I have a different relationship with the car that I'm in from A to B, and then I forget, I never see that car again, than the car that I drive for pleasure. Everybody accepts that if I buy an old timer, that's a special car for me. Well, for a lot of people, I mean, if you do an investment of 50, 60,000 euros, you don't want somebody else driving around in it. So that's what needs to change. What I've seen, and what I think is a very good thing, is that I've seen car brands go into bicycles, go into micromobility, and basically saying, okay, we have this dependable car brand. People know us, people know that the cars are good. Let's expand that into not replacing the vehicle, but complementing a car with an electric bicycle, complementing the car with a subscription on mobility as a service. Because once you own the car, I'm not obliged to use it. If it's not a smart choice for my trip that day, a car company that understands this would easily say, I know we have a very nice car at home, but right now I think it's best to take the train. That would be then you can make the transition from we're trying to sell you an asset to we're trying to sell you mobility.
Mm.
I believe that's where they should go, is really look into how can we complement what we're offering you, because a car has always in position as you can do anything in a car. And there was a Volkswagen Golf, I think, commercial a couple of months on TV where you shown a lifetime of emotions from grandmother to grandchild. Everything will happen in a Volkswagen Golf. If you can take that concept, like the Golf was there for every aspect of your life, say, no, Volkswagen can actually help you with all your mobility needs, and it doesn't have to be a car every time, then you have something.
On these purpose-built passenger movers predominantly, I remember a study from, I think it was from McKinsey, so 5-6 years ago, where they described some of these attributes that you also referred to, that it needs to be a little bit more so functional, hard-wearing, appealing to the majority of individuals that might use it, etc. Is this something that you believe that will actually come on a larger scale, and is there anyone working on this at the moment?
It will come on a larger scale if we look past what you just said and also say, okay, once we know that these are the specs of the vehicle, is that also brand the mobility solution that it provides to be in line with the branding of the car, then yes, it will happen. I believe there are several car brands working on this, but I haven't seen any examples of it. It's tied into the fact that electric car manufacturing is a lot more modular than internal combustion manufacturing, which means that on the same platform, you can much easier build different car shapes, different car configurations than you could with internal combustion engines. So I think we might be in a place where, from efficiency reasons, in having everything modular is an interesting choice. While from a mobility perspective, it opens up possibilities. If those two align, if it's not an extra investment, but it makes sense to have a modular vehicle, then yes, it will happen, because the interests of the company is to build your cars cheaper, to build them faster, and to build them more reliable with less components. If that is in line with your current car brand, and it's also in line with, hang on, if we're doing this for private car sales, we can easily adapt those vehicles to be shared vehicles. Yes, it will happen, but the business models will have to align, because with internal combustion engines in the past, and especially with the platforms that were in the past, building a people mover was a brand new platform. And it takes a lot of selling people movers to win that back. Whereas if you look at the ID4, the ID5 of Volkswagen, Skoda Enyaq, they're all the same platform. You could just as well build a rectangular platform on top of it and make it into a bus with a very minor investment. So electrification will probably make it much.
Yeah. Speaking of technological advancements, the last area that we could explore is the recent advancement of Gen AI. On a high level, what are some of the implications and possible use cases for Gen AI in the wider mobility as a service context?
I see two main areas of application. First is in the user interface. A user interface that can handle written language, regular language, or even spoken language with speech to text in any language possible makes a very, very flexible user interface. And then instead of saying, okay, I will select a bicycle, I select on a map the station where I need to go, you just say, I want to go from here to there, what's my options? And the system answers in a human voice, these are your options. You can even make it so that it learns your behaviors. If you don't like cycling, then maybe cycling won't be in the option that it presents to you. But I'm a big cycling fan, so maybe to me it will tell me, here's 5 kilometers, no problem. You like cycling that, so here are the bicycles you can get. But in the human interface between how do I make a selection across all the choices that I have, instead of having menu-driven, difficult interactions, I can just ask a question in normal language. That will have a big impact on how mobility as a service is perceived by the general audience. The second one where I see a very big change, and as Movias we've been experimenting with that as well, is in data translation from one standard to the other, data standardization. There's an XKCD cartoon that says now there's 14 standards, we need one standard to rule them all, and at the end we have 15 standards. In reality, that's how it happens. What we see with Gen AI, because most standards that are used in mobility as a service, but also in smart mobility in general, are not binary standards, are not hardly coded where you need specialist systems to understand them, but they're often text-based standards. There's DATEX, there's DATEX2, there's different profiles. More and more are being expressed as linked data being the basis of semantic web, which lends itself immensely to large language models, which means that if you tell a large language model, this is standard A, this is standard B, and he learns those standards, and you tell it, now this is standard C, you have an automatic interoperability between those standardizations, which makes it very, very much faster than before to convert either count data, network data, speed regulations from one country, from one region, or from one provider to the other, but also in terms of MaaS, for instance, API translations. My transaction is API is this, your transaction API is this, but hang on, we're both semantically rich APIs. Well, okay, here's a large language model that can translate my transaction, my contract to your contract, handshake, and we're done. So that's where I'll see, where I think in the next 1 or 2 years, we've already had a first proof of concept by having a regular question being translated into a query and taken from a database of traffic counts, where you say, show me all the traffic counts in that street between this and this hour for bicycles. And the answer is there, without me knowing exactly what standard it's in, or without me knowing any scripting or query language. You can do exactly the same by saying, here's my contract, here's the destination format, make it happen. And that will make interoperability so much faster, and being interoperable between different systems for dynamic traffic management, for car systems, for in-car systems, but also for mobility as a service will be an immense game changer, I believe. And that's purely the power of large language models.
As a final question, just building on what you've just outlined, imagine that you're speaking to a senior exec at one of these mobility solution providers. What would be your top 3 recommendations to unlock the most value from these advanced Gen AI solutions in a sustainable way?
First would be learn linked data, because linked data is the basis for any good, sustainable, and well thought out Gen AI software component or data component. Learn linked data and have linked data used in every aspect of your organization, because once your data is semantically rich, any business model that uses a large language model can speed up your operations by a factor 10. The second is, people are always afraid, AI will replace a factory worker, a programmer will replace a car, an autonomous vehicle will replace a car manufacturer. In reality, a programmer will be replaced by a programmer that uses AI. So don't start by saying, here at car manufacturer X, we have an AI department. because then you're doing it wrong. You need to say, okay, at car manufacturer X, we use AI as a tool in everything we do. And I believe me, it's going to be in everything you do, from bookkeeping down to engineering, down to your sales channels. AI will be a useful tool. Generative AI in particular will be a useful tool, speeding up operations immensely in any of those things. It's like photography. My children don't know what a digital camera is. They just know a camera. And an analog camera, well, that's old-fashioned, that's old school. That's nobody uses that anymore. They don't ask about a digital camera, so you shouldn't ask about an AI process. You should ask about a process where AI is involved. To be able to ready for AI, it's make your data standardized by making it semantically rich, and make sure that you have processes that can be sped up by using AI, by being AI friendly as a tool, not as an end goal. Don't make a project where the end goal is to do something with AI, because then you're going to have something that, okay, there's going to be a dedicated team working on it. They're going to have something ready. Then the rest of the company will look at it and go, thank you, but we don't need it. So you need to have it in every aspect of your organization, because basically it's a tool that allows you to work 10% of the time instead of 100%. It'll make you 10 times faster. Now make it 10 times more interoperable. The integration cost for data projects, for instance, and any car manufacturer has data projects. A car has become a driving beacon of sensors and data. I've seen projects where data integration projects have gone from 3 months to 1 day by using AI.
Thank you so much, Koenraad. That's been a super insightful conversation. Really appreciate you making time for this.
Thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure.